Into the Abyss, A Tale of Death, A Tale of Life, and Werner Herzog is in studio with us. Nice to see you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
I saw your film a couple weeks ago, and it is an incredibly tense ride to make it through this. You take us through the prison system in Texas in a way I don't think has ever been done before.
Well, we shouldn't just speak of Texas. You do have capital punishment in quite a few other states in the United States. And frankly, I'm not in the business of Texas bashing,
right,
nor in United States bashing. How can I, as a guest in your country, as a German, tell you how to handle criminal justice? I would be the last one. Of course, the film is very intense. Filming was very intense, and later during editing so intense that both the editor and I started smoking again.
Is that right?
Well, we shouldn't admit it, but it's actually true. It happened that we had to get out into the street, hang on to a cigarette for 5 minutes and then return.
And you edited the film pretty quickly too, right? The turnaround on the film was fairly fast.
It was, however, shooting was spread out over almost an entire year because there's very rare moments where you would have access to one of the inmates on death row, for example. So it was very interspersed, but editing itself went relatively fast. One of the reasons is because there was maybe only 8 hours of footage for the entire 1.5 hour film.
And which is very, very short for a documentary. Sometimes they'll go hundreds of hours of shooting.
Yes, I'm not one of those.
No.
Even though I had much more time, I wouldn't have shot that much. I'm very focused, and of course, I'm a storyteller, I'm a filmmaker, and I'm a director. Of course, I try to go straight for the hardcore of something, of a story, of a person, and do it.
Well, in this film, were you looking for this kind of story, or did the Michael Perry being on death row, how did it come to you?
Well, you have to check into death row cases, and then the procedure is you have to write to an inmate. He has to invite you, or she has to invite you, and then the warden has to agree, attorneys have to agree, and then you have a chance to go on camera with one of these inmates. I was fascinated by Michael Perry's and Jason Burkett's, his co-defendant's story, because of the senselessness of this crime. It was so particularly strange and senseless.
It was horrifying. It was absolutely horrifying. And you take us through the crime scene. I mean, there's times that you're going through this and you feel like the detective that shows up at the crime scene. And it's so senseless. It's so infuriating to see that this crime even took place.
Yeah. Still, I'm not an advocate of capital punishment. I would, if I had been a judge or if I had been the system here, I would plead for life in prison without parole. Capital punishment, that's a separate debate, and we shouldn't kick it loose. But of course, at the moment, it has some traction because of other cases that came to the attention of the general public. And all of a sudden, my film comes into a phase where it's really debated again.
As well it should be. It should always be debated. And I will tell you, going into this, I've always been about 90 to 95% against capital punishment. The one thing that I think that I would be somewhat sensitive to is the victim's family.
Sure, and they have a big space in my film, and it's dedicated to them.
And you who made this film that you're against capital punishment, you stated early on, you stay with it through the whole time. And I said, I'm almost at that point with you. But after seeing this film, I think I was closer to being for capital punishment because I was so infuriated over these two men, this idiotic crime that took place, and I had a very hard time shaking it. Now, I saw the film with someone who felt the exact opposite of me.
Yes, and I respectfully disagree if you are shifting into the camp of the people who are in favor of capital punishment. By the way, I should mention the woman who lost her mother and her brother in this spree of murders. I asked her, would life in prison without the possibility of parole be an alternative for you? And she says, yes, indeed, yes, yes. And I asked her about the biblical sort of connections that sometimes by the religious right are made. Would Jesus be an advocate of capital punishment? Answer, probably not. We don't know, but probably not.
No, particularly since he was a victim of capital punishment.
He was on death row for one night, and he was executed with two criminals who were on death row apparently a few days longer than he was.
One of the things that got to me, though, in the film was just seeing the horrific crime scene, the fact that it took place over a Camaro, the fact that while you're talking, one is doing life in prison, the other is on death row, and there's absolutely no reason that they should have two different verdicts. You would think any just system would have both verdicts.
Well, you have to accept the justice system. They were in different trials with a different jury. The jury, by the way, found the co-defendant, Jason Burkett, also guilty of triple homicide. But during the penalty phase, the jury decided not to execute him. And probably his father, who is also in prison, saved him by pleading to the jury. And he's a very tragic figure in a way, and he's very, very compelling. Very compelling what he says against capital punishment, by the way, and he apparently saved it. So you have to accept you have to accept the system as it is. Yes, there is a court of law. Yes, there is a jury, and if a different jury comes to a slightly different conclusion, we should rather accept it.
And Burkett's father was the only person there who I thought had remorse, had pain, wished
admitted his guilt.
Yeah, admitted
saw
his
it
guilt.
very clearly what went wrong.
And part of what was infuriating me and was pushing me in the other direction was the fact that Burkett and Perry seemed like they did not still connect with what they had done, not just to the victims, but to the families, to that community. It is baffling.
Yes, it's baffling for me as well. But when it comes to the question of death penalty, I, as a German citizen with all the dark times of the Nazi barbarism, cannot be an advocate of capital punishment. It's more a question of principle, but I'm a guest in your country, and I respectfully disagree with the practice.
One of the things that got to me is to see, knowing how long that the victims have been dead, and then seeing those two guys, Perry and Burkett. One of them, you can see him laughing about different things. You know, even though this is a horrible thing to be doing life in prison, you still can read, you still can make friends, you can still laugh. Burkett actually fell in love with somebody who wrote him.
Yeah.
So they are still having some kind of life, even though they snuffed out a life, one that, if they wanted that car so bad, they could have just taken the keys off of her.
That was actually the original plan.
Yeah.
Try to spend the night in this house because they had some common friends or acquaintances. Steal the keys of the car during the night and take off. And they had no real plan for afterwards. Vaguely, maybe we'll make it to California or whatever. The frightening thing is they found the lady at home baking cookies. It turns out that she's alone. And they decided spontaneously it would be so much easier just to kill her and then take the car. It's just mind-boggling. And then they disposed of the body, and when they returned, it was a gated community, the gate was closed, and they didn't have the clicker. So they waited for her son to come home in the evening, and unfortunately he had yet another friend in the car. They lured them out in the forest, shot them, and then they had access to the gate, and they took the car, and they were in possession of this car for less than 72 hours.
It's
mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. It's frightening. And as boyish as Perry looked like, the young man who was executed 8 days later after a shot, I think he was a very, very dangerous man.
Even still to this day, if he would have the opportunity to do it again, he hadn't learned anything, at least as far as the film shows.
No, I wouldn't completely take this position, because apparently he had gotten some insight in himself, and I think, and if certain things in his childhood and in his adolescence had been different, he could have been a very, very nice young man, maybe a very nice, considerate father, loving father of 2-3 kids. So I still believe they are human beings, as monstrous as the crimes are. People always tell me, they are monsters, just kill them off. Now I disagree. The perpetrators still are human beings, and I see them and I talk to them like to human beings, not like to monsters.
The thing that I think is so interesting about your film is that you lay enough out there, not just to make your case for anti-death penalty. Like I said, I felt myself shifting in personalities.
Yes.
So, and there are cases out there that you could say, hey, this is something that maybe we could look into. But in the case of Perry and Burkett, we have no doubt that they are the guilty parties.
Well, a court of law in the jury had no doubt.
Yeah.
So let's take it like that. And of course there was an overwhelming amount of evidence against them, not only 2 confessions in detail, and
taking the police to the bodies,
and on, knowledge that only a perpetrator would have. But it's not the question of establishing guilt or innocence. That was not my business. And yet there's something very disturbing about this whole, deeply, deeply disturbing, and I'm trying to look deep into our human condition to, in a way, establish what constitutes humanness.
And did anything change for you as you were watching, as the story unfolded in front of you?
Yes, because I keep asking everyone on death row, or, for example, the father of Burkett, who saved his life in court, how should we do our lives right? How should we raise our children? Whenever I speak with anyone so permanently in prison or on death row, it always comes back to small family values, very intensely, and all of a sudden I look at the whole question differently. Yes, we have to be on the side of our children, even though they do a lot of things wrong. You have to love them, encourage them to finish high school, encourage them to be part of a family and not go too far astray. That's one thing, family values. Second, the value of life out there. Something we overlook all the time, what a phenomenal privilege it is that we can open and close the door.
Yeah.
And we overlook it. Or, for example, seeing an abandoned gas station, seeing a cow in the field, all of a sudden it's something magnificent. And we see it daily, and we do not recognize anymore that this is the magnificence of the world out there. With a different death row inmate, I had a conversation of his last trip. They are taken from death row 43 miles to Huntsville because there is a death house and they are being executed. He was 23 minutes away from execution and got a stay. And the way he describes his last 43 miles in this prison van, it's just astonishing how he talks about a bridge and the light on the waves of the water, the sun on it, and how he sees a cow in a field. What a glorious moment. And he speaks, it was like Israel, it was like the Holy Land. And all of a sudden, everything looks out like the Holy Land. Even an abandoned gas station, all of a sudden, gives me the impression everything out there is like Holy Land.
Yes, because we no longer see everything as a miracle. You know what I mean?
Yes.
We have the time to be bored when these things that we will with our last breaths hold really, really precious.
Yeah.
I want to talk about one of the people in the film, and that's the prison guard, Fred Allen, who you spend some time with. That was really astonishing footage and astonishing conversations to find out what his life was like.
Well, you have to be aware he was pro-capital punishment. Mm-hmm. He was the captain of the tie-down team. The guys who strap you down to the gurney, they do it in 15 seconds flat. They're professional, do it with integrity, no doubt. And here, after 125 executions, all of a sudden he has a breakdown, starts to shake uncontrollably. I ask him how bad a shake was it, and he says, well, it was a shake. And he's a big, strong man, and he starts crying uncontrollably, cannot stop crying, and leaves his job from one day to the next at the cost of losing his pension. A wonderful man, and I think he's some sort, almost like a national treasure, in my opinion. And how he talks about his job as an executioner is so compelling that I think whoever sees him, hears him, has to have some doubts about capital punishment.
Yes, and that's where my doubts will also come back to me, because he represented us. He represented the state. He represented our society, where we're like, even though we're carrying out something that we may think is just, this is not good for us. This is not bringing us the right kind of energy that we need to have. And at a certain point, it just breaks.
In a way, yes. And there are encouraging signs. I think statistically speaking, the amount of carried out executions is flattening out or even declining. States in the United States that still condemn you to death have a moratorium and they will not kill you. For example, California has death penalty, but they do not execute. There's a moratorium. This is why the population of death row inmates in California is by far the largest in the United States, around 600, and it keeps growing because they do not kill them off.
Yeah, but did you see in the Republican debates when they brought up to Rick Perry, the governor?
Yes, I'm aware.
And people applaud it.
Yes.
There are a lot of folks who believe that it's just, and they tend to be, a lot of them tend to be our most religious people.
Yes.
Even in your film, God's will came up, no matter whose side you're on there.
Everyone invokes God.
Everyone invokes God and almost hands off their responsibility to God.
Right.
The prisoners had done this, the victim's family, the prison guard. It was amazing how many people felt some kind of connection to this God who was moving the chess pieces around.
Yes, of course, it's part of the debate. And of course, when you look at the popularity of capital punishment in some of the states, Florida, for example, Texas, it will not go away quickly.
No.
It will linger for a long time, because laws will only change if a good majority of the electorate somehow shifts their position. And it seems to be a fairly stable position, and this is why you had applause for Rick Perry, the governor of Texas, who is proud of having signed, I don't know, 250 or so.
It's over 200.
Over 200 death warrants. Yes, you have to look at it, and it's probably a question of long-term grassroots shift in politics.
And then oddly, in the states where they don't have it or they don't practice it, people seem to be okay and not calling for it more. I live in a city here in New York now, where Son of Sam in the 1970s, horrible murders, he's still alive today. But you don't run into people going, oh, I wish I wish David Berkowitz was dead. I wish, there's something wrong with our system.
I don't wish anyone to be dead, but in some cases of the most horrifying crimes, in case of real scary, dangerous men or women, I'm an advocate of life in prison without parole.
With no parole whatsoever, you think would be...
Because that's the safest way for society. And I see a point that society has a right to be protected.
Oh, absolutely.
But the question of, do we have the right to kill anyone or for any reason, that's a bigger thing out there.
And I give you, again, full credit. In your film, you show that what happens to family members, that just because the crime hasn't physically happened to you, if it happens to a close friend or family member, this can be life-altering when violence is brought in like this.
It's not, it could be life-altering, it is life-altering for all of them. And I'm speaking of victims, of families, of victims of violent crime. You see, if you are a victim of a financial scam or so, and you lose some money, yes, you're a victim, but victims of violent crime, that's really life-changing. All of a sudden your mother is murdered and your brother is murdered. So all of a sudden there's a huge void. There's fear. There's something that comes from one moment to the next where your entire life comes apart.
You've done the film Into the Abyss, A Tale of Death, A Tale of Life, but this isn't the end for you. This seems like this is a subject that you're going to be following for a while in different ways.
Well, there is, in addition to Into the Abyss, which is a theatrical film, and it's 1 hour and 45 minutes long or so, there's a series of shorter films, 4 shorter films on death row inmates, and pretty much focused on these people. But that they are shorter films, 52 minutes or 44 minutes here in the United States, 1 hour programs for television, because you add some time for commercials. You have 44-minute films, and they're very much focused on just one person on death row, not the entire tapestry of a crime and all its repercussion, not just an American Gothic in a way.
Yeah.
But it will be over soon, and I'm finishing 4 films. I'm editing them, and then I better move somewhere else. In fact, I'm moving into acting. I'm playing a villain. Yes, which is fine. Yes, I like to work as an actor as well.
You work as an actor, and of course you direct feature films. You direct documentaries. Is there ever a time that you're like, okay, now that I finished one, I want to move on to the other, or do you let these projects come to you?
I never plan a career like, now I finished a film, let's go to the New York Times bestseller list, which of the novels, where do I buy the rights, which one would be good? Now I've never functioned like that. I always follow the most intense urgency, the most intense pressure. Most of the films come at me like burglars in the night, unwanted guests, and you gotta get them out the door or the window or anywhere.
So that's once they come to you, we'll work on it. When it's finished, boom, behind you.
It's not just behind me. Of course, they are still alive like children, but they have to find their own way. They have to live their own life. But problem is that I never catch up in time. Now that I'm sitting with you, there are 4 or 5 feature film projects out there. There's an acting job out there. I run my own rogue film school, on and on and on. So it's the faster I work, the more the projects are coming at me.
Is it the same amount of passion that you've always had? Is the same amount of passion?
It hasn't stopped. I have actually worked faster now than in my younger years. I've done 6 films this year.
And how has that? Because technology changed, or just the way you work changes?
Well, it's part. I mean, I'm exaggerating now when I say 6 films. 4 of them, 5 of them are much shorter. It's not the full-length feature-length film. So I'm kind of leaning too far out the window. Part is some projects you can do easier and faster in terms of shooting. And I'm much faster now in editing. Editing in celluloid is quite time-consuming. It's a lot of craft. Now, digitally editing, I can edit almost as fast as I'm thinking.
Just that quickly?
Not that quickly, but I can do things much, much, much faster.
And there are some people that they would like to go back to the celluloid, but you like technology.
I'm always back into celluloid whenever there is a chance.
Yeah.
You see, the film I made on death row, you cannot shoot in celluloid because you cannot ask the inmate every 11 minutes, please hold your sentence because I have to change reels now. You just can't do it. You have to have 45 minutes going in one go, and you don't have to stop the camera.
When you were interviewing him, you held the camera? You were shooting?
No, there were tripods and 2 cameras actually, and I was only doing the conversation.
And did you only get that one conversation with Michael Perry?
Yes, he was executed 8 days later. And the rules are, if you want to talk to someone again, there has to be a hiatus of at least 3 months. Until you get the next meeting, because the prison system, correctly so, does not want to allow an inmate to become a regular in TV talk shows every week.
Sure.
So it's justified, and in Perry's case, there were no 3 months. 8 days later, he was dead.
And how was that for you when he was getting up and walking out? You knew it was literally dead man walking. You would never see him again. This young man was going to be dead.
Well, you never can tell exactly, because there was a last-ditch effort to get a clemency appeal. But knowing his case file and knowing all the transcripts of the court procedures, I was under the impression there wouldn't be any clemency. So deep in my heart, I knew I would never see him again. And he thanked me, by the way, he thanked me very, very much for being with him, because for almost an hour he was almost like back in his adolescence. He tells stories about a canoe trip in the Everglades, and he's completely oblivious of this little box in which he is encaged. And all of a sudden, and I allow him to be human, to be a human being who tells about his adolescence and about monkeys that jumped at him and things like this. And for almost 1 hour, he didn't notice that he was on death row.
And yet, that close he is to the gurney.
Yes.
You show in the film of where they're staying, where we're in the cell. It's not that many steps, and the way that they're strapped down. The window comes up, people are going to be sitting there to witness, and you know that night exactly everything that he was going through.
He knew, and I knew. I knew every single step of the procedure, and I knew at 6 sharp He would be taken from the holding cell 6-7 steps to the gurney. He would be strapped down not later than 6:01. The needles would be poked into his veins not later until 6:02, 6:03. He would have 30 seconds of a last statement, and then the lethal injection starts to flow, and he will be pronounced dead 6 or 7 minutes later.
If they would have allowed you, Werner, would you have shot that? Would you have?
No, under no circumstances whatsoever. I would not want to be witness of an execution. That would be the last thing. And even if I were allowed, and even if you gave me $1 million to film it, I would say, just get lost. I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it. There's such a thing, even though it's a public event, an execution, and there have to be some state witnesses. Yes, I accept that. But we as filmmakers stay out of it, period. It would be indecent. It would violate the dignity of a person's death. You just don't do it under no circumstances.
And yet, you did take us through the crime scene.
Yes.
We did see the blood. We did see the victim's foot in the water. I mean, there was no one there to worry about humanity for her. It's a horrific.
Well, I'm showing very discreetly some signs that there is really a dead person, and in case of this one young teenager who was found shot in the woods, you see one foot and the sneakers on it. I do not show more, and I have seen the full footage, and my only response is, I hope that no one ever sees what I have seen. When you look in detail at the damage that was done to a human being, and you look at it close up, I wish nobody has to see what I have seen. And it must not be shown on television. Same thing like in Grizzly Man, Timothy Treadwell, who was being mauled by a bear and eaten by a bear, and his girlfriend who switched on the camera, but it was so violent, this attack, that she didn't remove the lens cap. And you only have the audio, 6 minutes of audio, hearing 2 people die. Everybody, producers, distributors, TV station, and the public knew there was a tape in existence. And they asked me, address this. And I said, let me listen to it, and then I will make my decision. I listened to it, and it was clear, only over my dead body, this tape would be part of my film. And I told them, only over my dead body. Do you want me to walk out right away? And they accepted the position.
The film is Into the Abyss, A Tale of Death, A Tale of Life. I think it's the type of film that should be seen by people, and I would love there be a town meeting right after so people could talk, no matter what side of the issue they are on this. But I do think it's something Americans should be talking about all the time.
Well, I thank you for what you are saying.
Werner Herzog, thank you so much for being in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for having me.
Ron Bennington, Fez Whatley. This